This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Yanya Kellick. Right now I'm sitting down with Joel Griffith, Research Fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Joel, it's awesome to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So CPAC's happening. As I've been telling everyone, the energy level keeps rising here. Tell me, what is it that brings you here?
Well, this is my 8th time here in about 12 years. Mm-hmm. And like you said, the energy, you come in and you see so many hundreds, if not thousands of people that love the idea of liberty. It's not all about partisanship here, it's about people that really believe in our Constitution, believe in the power of free markets, and really believe in individual freedom. And you get to meet so many people from across really the world that you wouldn't get to meet throughout the year except for right here at this place in Maryland.
We haven't met before. I've been studying up on you a little bit. And we have so many things in common. Actually, there's so many things I want to talk to you about. But let's start with the Federal Reserve. What is the Fed doing right now? And actually, how is the President's comments on the Fed affected what the Fed is doing right now? What's your take on that?
Those are some complex questions.
Yeah.
Of course, in the news, there's been a lot of back and forth between President Trump and the Federal Reserve Chair about trying to encourage the Fed to not put the brakes yet on the economy. But I think what we really need to keep in mind is the bigger picture here. And that's the Federal Reserve has a very large imprint on our economy. A lot of this isn't really conspiracy. You can go to the Federal Reserve site, you can see the assets that they own, and there's approximately about $4 trillion worth of assets on the books of the Federal Reserve. They have the power to create the money supply, if you will, and inject that into the economy. And if you look at what they've done over the past 10 years, is they've built up the asset, the balance sheet of the Federal Reserve, and they put that money into primarily two segments of the economy.
Okay.
Mortgage-backed securities, the mortgage market,
right,
and government debt. They bought up a lot, trillions of dollars worth of government bonds. And at the end of the day, what that means is the Federal Reserve is allocating resources to those two parts of the economy. And I think that's what we should be concerned about, is that any governmental or quasi-governmental organization can have that much power to allocate the resources. I think we need to take a careful look at that, and I think that politicians on both sides of an aisle are.
Wait a sec, are you saying that we need to reform the Fed? Is that what I'm hearing?
Exactly, we do need to reform the Fed. The Federal Reserve...
Sounds controversial.
Well, they certainly serve a vital role in our country, for better or for worse. But there are things that we can do to reform the way the Federal Reserve operates. And part of that really would center on lowering their footprint by allowing those assets to fall off the balance sheet. And once you do that, you allow the private sector to determine, well, how much do we want to allocate to mortgage-backed securities in the residential housing market? How much of our assets do we want to allocate towards purchasing government debt? And it'll allow those prices to more accurately reflect supply and demand. Right now, some of that has become quite distorted.
You know, you're here representing Heritage. What is the Heritage position exactly? Or is that what you just told me?
Well, the Heritage position would be to diminish the imprint of the Federal Reserve by allowing that balance sheet to shrink, which would really be a return to what was normal just about 10 years ago.
Is that related to the quantitative easing and so forth?
Exactly.
Okay.
So in short, what the Federal Reserve did is they went ahead and purchased mortgage bonds, purchased government debt, and that money then gets injected into the economy. Now, to stop that money from going to the banks and being lent out, which would have resulted in possibly massive inflation, what the Fed began to do is to pay interest on excess reserves for the bank. So if you're a bank, you need to have a certain amount of money set aside so that people come in to cash the deposits, the money's there, so you don't have a banking meltdown. And that's healthy to have a bare minimum. But what the Fed began to do was increase the rates they pay for the banks to keep that money on hand at the Fed. And as they increased that interest rate, the banks kept more and more money on hand at the Fed. The money that the Fed had created by purchasing bonds and purchasing mortgage debt, it stopped that money from flooding the marketplace.
Right, and preventing inflation.
Yes. The downside of that, of the Fed actually deciding they're going to create those trillions of dollars and then pay banks to hold it back, the downside is it distorted our economic system. And it allocated an increasing proportion of our economy, if you will, to the debt and to the residential market.
So Joel, tell me a little bit more about how the housing fits into this picture.
Well, I think as a lot of us have memory of about 10 years ago, we had a housing market meltdown. We had markets where housing prices plunged by 30 and 40 and 50%. A lot of that blame was placed on capitalism. I would argue that's a misplaced blame. Look at what actually was going on behind this. You had government mandating that loans be made, in effect, to people that were not creditworthy, and you had the government going ahead and actually implicitly guaranteeing mortgage debt issued by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac.
This is all this is what created the crisis,
yes.
Basically, right? Yeah.
Trillions of dollars flooded into the housing marketplace because investors knew they could buy the mortgage debt, and they knew if the mortgage went belly up, well, they're going to be
safe.
Compensated.
Yeah.
So just like any market the government jumps into by way of subsidization, you're going to have really excess demand. You're going to have those prices increase, and that's exactly what we saw happen here in the United States. And I'm afraid we're beginning to reinflate that bubble. And even if we don't have another meltdown, that's going to result in less affordable housing for everyday Americans. And the people that benefit are the investors that buy that debt knowing if it fails, the government's going to have their backs. The government being all of us, the taxpayers.
So what's the solution here?
The solution is to lower the imprint that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have. I would say the best way to do that...
Take a little power away.
Why are we putting a guarantee on these investments? If we go ahead and shrink that guarantee, or at least lower the loan size by which the government will guarantee, that would be a step in the right direction.
Okay, got it. Well, and there's a third area that actually, we both share an interest in, and that's around Israel and anti-Semitism specifically. And I know you've worked on these issues in the past. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you've done? And specifically in the media, we've been seeing a lot about anti-Semitism being thrown around in all sorts of different directions. What's your take?
It's a big concern of mine, and it should be a concern of ours in general. What we've seen lately, we've seen a group of freshman congresspeople that have been advocating for boycotting, divesting, and sanctioning Israel. It's known as BDS.
Right.
Really, the ringleader of that in Congress right now is a freshman legislator, Representative Ilhan Omar. She's made comments that Israel is hypnotizing the world, and she has called Israel an apartheid state. Now, if Israel were an apartheid state, or any nation, we should call a country like that out. But Israel is not an apartheid state. I don't know if she's been there, but I've been there numerous times, and this is all public information you could actually research. Israel is a land of Arab Israelis and Jewish Israelis. All have access to equal rights, equal access to government services. If you walk through Jerusalem, where you've got Christians, Muslims, and Jews, along with other faiths, you'll notice they're all worshiping in freedom. You have Orthodox Jewish observers. They're at the wall surrounding the Temple Mount. Directly above them is the Dome of the Rock, where Muslims are gathered in prayer. A few blocks away, you have the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which, according to Catholic tradition, Jesus was once buried there.
Right.
And you have Christians worshiping there of multi-denominations.
Joel, I think the apartheid is referring specifically to how Israel treats the people governed by the Palestinian Authority, the Palestinians.
Yes. So there's some of those that are advocating BDS suggest that that Israel's presence in Judea and Samaria, known as the West Bank, they argue that is in and of itself apartheid regime. But that is definitely a misstatement of the truth. Now, there are Jewish communities in that region, communities that really go back in time since the founding of the Jewish state, but even before. There's been a Jewish presence in that area for thousands of years, dating back to the Kingdom of David. If you have a chance to go to the old city of Jerusalem right outside, there's actually, they have found the city of David, and this is technically in the West Bank. So the Jewish people have had a presence there for years. There have been Arabs that have been living there for hundreds of years as well. Now, as it stands now, if you are somebody who's a Palestinian and not Israeli, you have freedom to actually buy and sell land in the Jewish majority areas. But if you are somebody who's Jewish and you're looking to buy land in an area controlled by the Palestinian Authority, guess what? You've got serious legal problems because the person's selling you that land under penalty of death. That's the risk they take, a penalty of death or incarceration by the Palestinian Authority. That's the risk they run by daring to sell land in that region to somebody who's Jewish. That's the true apartheid state. What I'd like to see is what we're seeing happen, and that's Arabs, Palestinians, Jews, Israelis coming together in that area and engaging in enterprise. And there's a lot of those business ventures now, and that benefits people of all ethnic backgrounds. That's what we should be focused on.
Excellent. Well, thank you for taking the time, Joel.
Thank
I really
you for having me.
appreciate it.